fighting games have often been overlooked on world building and story by the masses. While some games have a stronger cast in terms of lore, like Guilty Gear and Soul Calibur, none are as long lasting as Street Fighter. With a legacy spanning almost 40 years, there are plenty of fan favorites that get their time to shine, whether it's personality, character interaction, playstyle, or a mix of all of the above. I would like to focus on a fan favorite that to outsiders is very plain and boring, Mr. Dragon Punch and Fireball himself, Ryu. Ryu and his rival Ken have been mainstays since the first Street Fighter in 1987, and have evolved a lot since those days. While Ken usually steals the show with his fancy footwork, fire trails, and an action movie revenge plot as far as Street Fighter 6 goes, and others that came later, like Cammy, have a much more robust and gripping story, Ryu has had his own arc that embodies not just Street Fighter, but also all fighting games as a whole. Ryu's personal story of how he becomes a better fighter touches upon many different facets of how he sees the world around him and how others see him. Before getting to the video proper, I will only be talking about the mainline Street Fighter titles, those being the numbered entries and the alpha games. I'm not going to be touching the EX games or any of the crossovers, as those are spin-offs. A lot of the cleanup work was helped with me stumbling across this video made by ClementJ64 while I was writing this, so go check this video out. It's linked in the description below. With the preamble out of the way, let's begin. Ryu was orphaned from a young age and has no memories of his parents, and very little memories of the monk he was entrusted to. He would later be adopted by his martial arts master, Gouken. Ryu would spend his days training under Gouken in the art of Ansatsuken, and watching Gouken, Gouken's master Gotetsu, and Gouken's brother Akuma sparring. Later on in Ryu's training, Gouken takes Ken Masters under his wing, a hot-headed spoiled delinquent who becomes Ryu's lifelong rival and very much like a brother to him. When Ryu turned 23, Gouken let him and Ken leave the dojo as they've both become fine fighters and would benefit from traveling the world. And it's where the rivals part ways, with Ken asking who will become the world's most famous martial artist. While Ken leaves for the US, Ryu leaves for Thailand to face Sagat, the Emperor of Muay Thai. This backstory and resolve establishes the key touchstones of Ryu, and is in line with a lot of martial arts movies. Limited connections, but those that do exist are stronger than steel, and a journey of personal growth for whatever reason. His outfit further supports this, as it's a traditional gi with the black belt of the characters of Furin Kazan, which is a classic phrase in Japanese culture meaning wind, forest, fire, and mountain. This shows that he is a fierce warrior, but with the outfit being so new, he has much to learn. In Street Fighter 1, the whole arcade mode is a means for Ryu to be able to have the right to face Sagat, as his final fight in the arcade mode is against Sagat, to where the match ends with Ryu tearing open Sagat's chest with a near-fatal Shoryuken, causing Sagat to become Ryu's first true enemy, at least temporarily. The Street Fighter Alpha series has two stories tied to it. Alpha 1 and 2 tackle the same story in different ways, and Alpha 3 is a continuation of the story. This is where we get the first instance of Ryu's reflective nature, as he has spent several months between Street Fighter 1 and the Alpha games traveling, asking himself what is the meaning of anything in life. He's already defeated Sagat, which crowned him as the world's strongest, but he refuses to believe it, that he has already achieved his goal so soon, and picked up some new moves in the time between games. Inside a secluded island, he encounters his biggest enemy that stays throughout the series, the previously mentioned Akuma. After the fight, Akuma says that he was just testing him to see if he has the same power, telling him of the Satsui no Hado, and Akuma proceeds to show it off by destroying the island. Once off the island, he runs into Ken, asking what it means to be a true fighter, questioning if his fist is like the one that defeated Sagat, or the same one that Akuma uses to kill people. Ken, in his usual hot-headed fashion, tells Ryu that he's just been thinking too much, and proceeds to fight him and win. After the match, Ken tells Ryu that he has yet to answer his question, and to keep searching, giving Ryu his red headband that Ryu still wears to this day. This is also where he has his first interaction with a pseudo-student, Sakura. The reason I say pseudo-student is because Ryu has always believed that he is not good enough to have a student, but still spars with her when given the opportunity. He also fights Sagat, though he holds back because Sagat's wounds haven't healed, and lets Sagat win, and Sagat understands that this is a hollow victory, vowing to challenge Ryu again with a clearer mind. In Alpha 3 he confronts Bison, and despite his best efforts, he is defeated and brainwashed, using the Satsui no Hado inside Ryu as a form of psychopower, causing the first instance of evil Ryu, or a version at least. He is saved by Ken, Sakura, Maki, Guy, and Sagat, the latter of which squared off against the brainwashed Ryu, breaking him free from mind control, and Ryu destroys Bison temporarily. This is the first instance we have a lot of conflict of Ryu, and starting to lay down the very important parts of his story. The introduction of a power that he can't quite control gives him a new goal of grappling with it, so that his want to be the best does not become all-consuming, like what happened with Akuma in grasping the Satsui no Hado, and further shows the difference between himself and Ken. This is also the first game that shows Ryu's bonds and how they morph in games to come. Street Fighter 2 doesn't have as much to cover when it comes to Ryu's end, but it does get complicated as there are conflicting cases of what exactly happened leading into Street Fighter 4, as Street Fighter 2 has a lot of pieces of media tied to it, so I'll be focusing on what has been backed up by several sources. Ryu attends the World Warrior Tournament, which was held by Bison, who has been resurrected after using Rose's body. The main fighter that Ryu fought was Sagat, and emerged victorious for the second time, and in this go-around, Sagat feels nothing but respect for Ryu. While Ryu was supposed to fight Bison in the final, Akuma assassinated Bison, challenging Ryu instead, where the victor is unknown. Not much is gained with this story, and it makes sense as this was the first Street Fighter game that laid down the groundwork for the series to come in terms of gameplay and character styles. Street Fighter 4 is when the games get a lot more storied, and when we start to see some important changes for Ryu. On top of what happens in the game, we have The Ties That Bind, an animated OVA that takes place before Street Fighter 4. After the events of Street Fighter 2, Ryu still has the conversation of Akuma ringing in his head of giving into the Dark Hado or else Akuma will kill him. Running into a biker in the desert and learning of a US champion who abandoned his family, Ryu assumes it's Ken and tracks down the house he was told about, but is ambushed by C. Viper, an undercover CIA agent masquerading as an SIN member. He is briefly saved by Cammy, but she ends up getting tortured by Viper. This causes Ryu's Dark Hado to flare up, consuming him. This causes him to almost kill C. Viper and kills a bunch of scientists when she escapes. Ken, Guile, Chun-Li, and Sakura manage to restrain Ryu until he calms down and save Cammy. This is where Ryu learns that he is being targeted by SIN and their leader Seth, who is trying once again to use the Satsui no Hado for nefarious purposes. Ryu squares off against Seth, where Seth states his definition of power, and it is a grotesque and visceral version of Akuma's view. Ryu says that he has no need for that kind of power, and awakens to something different, the Muno Ken, or Power of Nothingness, and dispatches Seth. Despite the stories being the same in all versions of Street Fighter 4, the endings are very different from vanilla to super and onward. Ryu investigates a tournament held by SIN, running into several different fighters. He rematches Sagat, Sakura, and Ken. It's inconclusive on who won with Sagat and Ken, the latter of which isn't fully counted in the score, as they got caught up with several other fights, and could not give it their all. He then goes on to defeat a version of Seth. In the vanilla ending, after defeating his Seth, he then sees a Blease, a boiling liquid expanding cell explosion machine turn on, and before it's able to suck the Satsui no Hado out of him, he's able to destroy it with a well-placed Shoryuken, guarding Sakura in the process. After this, he encounters his old revived master, Gouken. Gouken then seals out the Satsui no Hado inside Ryu with the Muno Ken, and this has Akuma square off against Gouken, winner taking the Cub. It's never been confirmed the results of the fight, but the only thing that is certain is that Akuma did not win, considering we see Ryu with Gouken in 5, and evil Ryu is not a character in 3, 5, or 6. He bids Gouken and Sakura farewell and continues the wandering warrior path. This game is a mark of change in Ryu. This is the first game where we start seeing the reflective nature firsthand, mainly with how he values many fighters, mainly Sagat, Ken, Gouken, and Sakura. The main thing this sets up is the path that Ryu will go down of mastering and using the Muno Ken that gets further expanded on in the further games, and the damage of a corrupted Ryu if the path of the Satsui was to be continued. Before we get into Street Fighter V's general story mode, we have to go over Ryu's story mode, as it serves more of a prologue for him and being a more in-depth look into Ryu's mind for what it's like to fight with the Satsui no Hado and trying to suppress it. He doesn't find the answer quite yet, but it does put his mind at ease and reaffirms his path. Street Fighter V's story mode is shockingly pivotal to Ryu's story, despite its slapdash execution. Ryu's part begins when he is visiting Dalsum to help him fully conquer the Satsui no Hado, to no avail, when he is attacked by Necalli, an ancient Aztec warrior spirit who's been foreseen to steal 3 souls, Ryu, Dalsum's, and Bison's, in the next dire hour. Necalli bests Ryu, and this causes Ryu to succumb partially to the Satsui no Hado, but Dalsum is able to snap Ryu out of it. There Ryu lays his eyes on a black moon, and sees who's responsible for it, Bison. Ryu's next seen in the Forbidden Grotto, undergoing some special training to face the Satsui no Hado inside him, and Ken visits for a good match. Ken's able to beat him for now and is summoned away by Karin, saying he'll cover for Ryu and that Ryu will show him the results of the special training. Ryu then doesn't show up until much later, when the Black Moons are about to fall, where he engages once again with Necalli, saying that he's different from before. He's able to best the Aztec spirit, and tries to tap into the Muno-Ken, and manages to face the Satsui no Hado within him. He's able to beat Necalli, like that's a big accomplishment, and then goes to help the other world warriors stop Shadaloo, leading to one final clash with Bison. He's able to best the Dictator, and fires a Hadoken charged with the Muno-Ken, dissolving Bison's spirit for good, and with that, Shadaloo has been bested. For now. To cap it all off, Ryu and Ken square off once again, with Ryu being the winner this time. And despite Ryu finding his answer, symbolically shown by the red bandana Ken gave him falling off, he still takes it back because the journey of fighting doesn't stop, and Ryu can always get better. A handful of character story modes serve as epilogues and have Ryu as a central figure. First off is Sakura's story, where it revolves around Sakura's way of thought. Back in the alpha game, she was a high schooler and she only cared about getting stronger because her inspiration went down that path. But as she's grown older, her worries of what it means to live have taken over. She talks about it with Karin, who eggs her on bringing up Ryu. While lost in thought, she bumps into Ryu, with him saying it was an emergency. She spars with him and asks him a question afterwards, if being alone and eventually dying is the right way to live. He helps her figure out her predicament, making her realize that she wants to have kids of her own. Not with Ryu, you creeps! Before getting embarrassed of what she's said in front of Ryu, showing that despite Sakura idolizing Ryu and his methodology, they are different people. The next one is Kage. Seeing as how Street Fighter 4 had confirmed that the Satsui no Hado had been suppressed by Gouken, and Ryu manages to dispel the Satsui no Hado in the story mode of Street Fighter 5, evil Ryu is no more. As a result, we have Kage, which translates to shadow. While the host has managed to suppress the Satsui no Hado, the darkness still persists, and it fights against several of Ryu's opponents, Sagat, Akuma, and lastly, himself. While it beats them in the story mode, it fails to beat through them. Sagat fails to be intimidated by it, Akuma disposes of it easily, and Ryu merely shrugs it off, goading the shadow into living however it wants, causing the shadow to disappear, ending the existence of Kage, and any hope of an evil version of Ryu. The last one is Akuma, specifically Akuma's last fight of where they square off, Satsui no Hado versus Muno-Ken. While Akuma claims victory, he notices Ryu is smiling, and Ryu mentions that he can ask a question, and that's what it means to make him human. The question was asked with his fist, and Akuma's fist must answer. This has Akuma respond by saying that he will see Ryu at the end of his path, with an uncharacteristic smirk on his face. This by far is the most story-heavy Street Fighter for Ryu, as it marks the end of his ways of trying to fight the Satsui no Hado. It shows a deep side of maturity, and how he's even found some foothold of respect for Akuma. His main regrets, demons, and struggles are behind him. He has managed to find peace for himself, but the man still knows that there is no end in the journey of self-improvement. While he is always still learning, he has been able to become an oracle for many. Now that he has triumphed over his urges, he can continue down the path of the wandering warrior with a clearer mind. At this point, much of Ryu's arc has finished as a character. He barely even has anything to do with the secret society. But now he can be used to inspire others. At the age of 33, he still is the same man, but now since Ken has been paying more attention to his family, their relationship has gotten frayed. Ken sees Ryu for the first time in a while and introduces his student Sean. He later fights Sean as Ken's instructions to Sean were to find and defeat Ryu, and easily beats him time and time again. There are a lot of sparring matches that he has in the storyline of Street Fighter 3, mainly a friendly spar with Ken, a street fight with Alex, and a tournament fight with Oro. He's able to beat Ken and Alex, and while he still loses to Oro sees him as one of the most capable fighters, and declare him to be his student, though Ryu doesn't show interest in his style of fighting. In his own ending, Ryu is seen meditating, but also reminiscing on his youth, and reminding himself of why he fights. Similar to Street Fighter 2, there isn't much to cover for Ryu in this game, but that's because the focus went towards the new generation of fighters. As of writing, this is the latest game in the franchise, and all of the mainstays have received very drastic redesigns, and seeing how this game takes place after the fall of Shadaloo, as far as most of the fighters know, and the secret society has already been beaten, we see how characters fare in times closer to peace. Before we talk about Ryu's story, I would like to cover his redesign, as it's the first time since Alpha we've seen a drastic change, and it's one of my favorites in the game. First off, he is now sporting a full beard, his traditional gi has been replaced with only the bottom half being white, and a maroon kasaya is draped over his top half. His gloves are now brown compared to the red gloves with stylized writing, and he is now wearing sandals. This redesign shows that he is closer and closer to mastery, as his outfit is becoming closer to that of his own master, Gouken. And it's further reflected in his gameplay, but that will be covered later. As far as World Tour goes, he resides in Genpu Temple, a remote temple located in Japan. His first introduction in World Tour is him training with deliberate movements, with cherry blossom petals dancing around him, ending in a Shoryuken leading to a cherry blossom petal dragon with the kanji reading Rising Dragon Fist, or Shoryuken. You ask him to fight, and at first he says no, but then he sees you're a persistent one, and lets the fist do the talking. After the fight, he mentions how your spirit reminds him of another one who was just as determined as you are to become a student, and that she's improved leaps and bounds, and that her goals now eclipsed his, referencing Sakura wanting kids. While seeing you perform the basic moves, he notices a similar aura of cherry blossom petals around you, although much weaker. You then learn Ryu's style. Many of his bond conversations revolve around Ryu's travels, and here is where we get to see Ryu not as a fighter, but as a person. He reminisces about his travels he's been on, the kind of people he's met, and even brings back a forgotten Street Fighter 1 fighter, that being Retsu. This also reveals some other interactions he's had, such as Chun-Li buying Ryu clothes so that he doesn't have as many issues at airports as he travels around the countries, and even wears the clothes Chun-Li bought him to the baths. And Ken opened a bank account for Ryu to store Ryu's winnings. He also talks about the events he's participated in, such as a small event carrying a Mikoshi, including Retsu and Dan. It also shows Ryu's mentality of looking forward. As I mentioned in his backstory, he was orphaned at a young age and has very little memory of his parents, but he never cared. His goal is to move forward and to learn of his surroundings. He's deeply interested in the cultures he surrounds himself with, and is amazed at what people can create. And while yes, he's been able to conquer his demon of the Satsui no Hado, and is happy where he's come, he's still excited to keep walking down the path of fighting, and experience new things, especially new fighters. And he's finally ready to pass on his teachings to his students. His texts are of the same beat. Initially it's a man trying to learn how to type with a keyboard and signing off his text chains like a letter with sincerely. And as you get closer with Ryu, he changes his profile picture, starts spamming emotes, and tries to learn how to type better with the keyboard. Putting aside the memes of Ryu asking if phones now have IQ tests, or the answer lies within the heart of the internet, it shows that in life, Ryu is not one to back down from a new experience. His own story of fighting is a testament to that, but for the first time we see that mentality applied to something else. He has a bit of an additional story in the few story modes, which are the arcade modes. His is pretty simple, as he's just traveling around the world fighting those who are eager. He runs into Luke, who has been trying to track him down, and asks for a sparring match. Ryu asks for what purpose does Luke fight, to which Luke is confused, but saying that he wants a shot at those who are better than him. Ryu accepts the answer and beats the young coach. Ryu remarks on how Luke reminds him of his younger days. Luke then is only able to get a picture of Ryu similar to the famous ending in Street Fighter 2, where he walks away from the camera, but reflects on saying that maybe it isn't so bad. His other main appearance is in Akuma's main story. He shows up to Akuma's abode in Emma's Hollow and smiles once again, like he did back in Street Fighter 5. And despite it being a fight to the death, they're both enjoying it. It cuts back to Akuma carving wooden dolls to further confirm Ryu's progress has left a mark on him. You see the latest wooden doll, carved with a smile similar to the one Ryu wore during the fight. This part of Ryu's story is after his integral arc, and more so serves to see his mentality. Now that the Satsui has been quelled within and Ryu is continuing on his own journey, this expanding on how he's lived and what else there is to do outside of fighting is a refreshing turn of events, and for many people turn this wandering warrior into a full character by just knowing more about him, and this can be seen through most of the bonds he's built along the way. First, and by far the closest bond, is his old friend and main rival, Ken Masters. Ken is a foil down to even moveset differences. While Ryu is an orphan living closer to a hermit, Ken was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and has a wife and kid, even if he is on the run as of Street Fighter 6. Ken's design also plays into this foil, with Ryu mainly being more straight-laced, with spiked up brown or black hair and a neutral white gi. Ken has a striking red gi with longer blonde hair from the days of his delinquency. These colors have strong meanings in Japan, with white symbolizing purity, while the red represents passion. The two began learning under Gouken, and while Ryu went to Thailand to fight against Sagat, Ken went to the US and became the champion, meeting his wife in the process. Despite their differences in lifestyles and upbringings, Ken and Ryu often go out searching to spar each other, and have faced off against each other in almost every title, the exception being Street Fighter 6. Alongside being the one to give Ryu's signature red headband, Ken goes out to find Ryu when he learns of him being kidnapped by the rumor of Ken abandoning his family, and covers for Ryu in the Street Fighter V story to let him finish the special training to quell the Satsui no Hado. As a result, Ryu views Ken as the only person that he can reach out to talk about his personal struggle. It's also shown in smaller ways. Several of the games show special intro animations, and with each of them, Ryu and Ken got one. There's a few exceptions to the standard ones, such as Alpha 3 of where Ryu gets a noogie from Ken before throwing him off and beginning the fight, but the main one appears in Street Fighter 3, 4's Rival System, and 5's Story Mode, where you see their classic fist bump. It's also shown that Ryu's there for Ken, such as Ryu showing up for Ken's wedding, being the only time we see Ryu wearing a suit. The movesets further prove the foil, and while both Ryu and Ken are practitioners of Ansatsuken, the specialties are very different. Ryu's Hadokens are stronger and have a different form in Hashirageki, including Dungeon Charge. His Shoryukens and Tatsus deliver one strong blow and have sparks of electricity throughout, and a focus on stronger punches. Ken's Hadokens are basic, but he focuses much more on kick-based attacks, such as his Hell Wheel, the multiple kick specials he has. His Shoryukens and Tatsus are multi-hits, and burst into flames among other skills. This is further shown in the supers that they usually have. Ryu's usually involve the Hado set of skills, be it 3 different Hadokens throughout the games, or Shin Hashirageki. His Shoryuken supers, Shin Shoryuken and Metsu Shoryuken, have 4 hard hits. Ken's supers are much more fiery and focus on kicks, such as Gurren Seppukyaku, Dragon Lash Flame, or Shippujinrai. Ken's Shoryuken supers also follow this rule. Shinryuken has him travel high in the air, hitting the opponent multiple times, and Shoryurepa is a set of Shoryukens, and in Street Fighter 6 they're combined into Shinryu-Repa, a set of 3 Shoryukens. The first 2 act like the old Shoryu-Repa, and the last one is a Shinryuken, with the critical art adding an inspiration of a student, Sean, with a slam down akin to Dragon Smash. This one character exists to set a constant for Ryu, and despite Ryu having more wins than Ken in their spars, it's not one-sided. And despite Ken's situation in Street Fighter 6, the two still hold each other in very high regard, and if not for one another, they would not be as strong fighters as they are. The King of Muay Thai has had a rocky relationship with the One-Ring Warrior, from the first enemy to one of Ryu's longest rivals. After his loss in 1, he joined Shadaloo as one of the 4 kings, driven by revenge to fight Ryu once again, and he manages to score a victory in Alpha, but as mentioned before, it's a hollow victory, knowing that Ryu held back because of Sagat's injuries. This causes Sagat to reflect on his motivation, and in Alpha 3 he lets Dan win, seeing that Dan is blinded by revenge for his father, like how Sagat was driven to beat Ryu. Sagat has also been able to temper his rage and sees Ryu as a rival rather than an enemy. Most of the main clashes end here with the Muay Thai King, but the initial spat in Street Fighter 1 and the Alpha games caused to show how these two interact through the matches and more importantly, a change in morality. Ryu's drive to be better but still let Sagat win in Alpha 2 is the first crack of him being different from Akuma, and not being taken over by the Satsui no Hado. If he had accepted the path, Sagat would be dead in the Alpha games, but instead in 2 and 4, they were both rivals of one another, and despite Sagat's depression arc in 4, him being goaded by one of his students, being Adon, and being able to discover the ultimate purpose of the fight, causes a rematch with Ryu, which we don't know who won. And Sagat even mentions that he had fun on this trip because of running into an old friend. His friendship with Sakura is the closest we see to Ryu being a sensei. While he has had little direction in Sakura's life, many of his ideals, practices, and the interactions have been a guide for Sakura to understand how to live her own life. When she first met him, she was a high schooler who thought street fighting was only for fun. But by the time she gets to college, she realizes that while she idolizes her hero, she's a very different person. Ryu always believed in the betterment of oneself, and that he will always be moving forward on his own path. Sakura also believes in the bettering of herself as well, but it's through having others along the way and wanting to have a bond to share. Those two paths often cross over each other, but the destination is very different. And the last two that will be looked at go hand in hand, as they're the proteges of the same master, and important to Ryu's growth in relation to battle over the Satsui no Hado that Ryu possesses. And they are brothers after all. But first, some background is in order. Gouken and Akuma were under the same master, Gotetsu. And the first rift happened when there was a dispute in the purpose of one technique, the Shungoku-Satsu, or the Raging Demon. Gouken detested the use of the technique and the violent nature of the style, and left to start his own dojo, focusing on the Muno-Ken. Akuma continued to train under Gotetsu, and eventually killed his own master with the Shungoku-Satsu. Gouken was the one who took Ryu and Ken under his wing, and taught him the style of Ansatsuken in the secret dojo, and once they were ready, sent them off to test and hone their skills. Sometime later, Akuma would show up to the dojo and end up victorious, killing Gouken with a Shungoku Satsu. But because of the mastery of the Muno Ken, Gouken was able to empty his soul of all emotion, saving his life and left him in a deep coma. Ryu and Ken discover the dead body when they return to the dojo and bury him near Suzaku Castle, where Ryu visits his grave once a year. Gouken and Akuma show how Ryu values respect from others. While Gouken is his foster father and master, as Gouken taught Ryu everything he knew, and was a major catalyst into Ryu awakening the Muno Ken, Akuma initially was a fighter that Ryu fought out of hatred, as seen in Street Fighter Alpha and 4, with the tone of how they talk being more emblematic of it.
Still haven't transcended humanity, huh? You lack discipline.
You haven't transcended your humanity. You've thrown it away.
Prepare to meet your maker.
In Street Fighter 5 and 6, however, the tone is softened due to respect.
You seem to revel in this. Again, that smile. You make light of a fight to the death?
You must feel it through my fists. How every ounce of my being is going into this. Am I wrong? And I sense it in you too. From the moment we clashed, you're also reveling in this fight.
You shall not make a mockery of me.
Ryu and Akuma, while fighting in an ideological sense, have found respect for one another as fighters, and shown in how Akuma has the image of Ryu smiling while fighting him imprinted with the wooden doll of Ryu in Street Fighter 6. Before I begin this section, much of the groundwork was covered by this video by Sugar Punch. It will be linked in the description below as well. Ryu's moves also add to his character as they show how his style is one of mastery and being well-rounded, as well as the principles that lie within the inspirations. Ryu's style was known as Shotokan in the earlier games and Ansatsuken in the later games. The name Ansatsuken originates from Fist of the North Star and means Assassin's Fist. The reason for the name change is mainly because Capcom USA did not want their star protagonist to have such an evil-sounding fighting style. Despite the name, it is not Shotokan Karate, or at least not most of it. Shotokan Karate is a style of karate invented in 1928 and is the influential core of Karate Do. With the style comes 20 precepts of karate, based on Bushido Code and Zen, with the belief being that the ultimate aim of karate lies not within victory or defeat, but the perfection of character in the participant. Shotokan focuses on control, spacing, and being able to disengage safely, and seeing moves like Ryu's crashing medium kick, roundhouse, and even his Jodan Sokutagiri, or donkey kick, they fit Shotokan accurately. The other style that more resembles Ryu's moves is Kyokushin. The main fighter that Ryu was based off of, Yoshiji Soeno, is a Kyokushin fighter from the 60s. This style is much better up close, as it involves body blows such as uppercuts and solar plexus punches, and a closed stance, which is seen throughout Ryu's stances and moves in every game. The key portions are likely covered by Shorinji Kempo, which is a style adapted from Shaolin Kung Fu, mainly being the practices of Qigong, which talks about spiritual development. This all adds up to Ryu being an all-rounder, with far-striking kicks and close-striking body blows, in that his style is applicable to every fight, which would be very useful for an assassin. This is further confirmed in his tier placements. In most if not every game that Ryu has been in, he is placed high to the mid-tier, as being the pinnacle of an honest fighter. However, that's not all that is applicable to the fighter, as his special moves also fit into this kit. Let's start with Ryu's 3 main special moves, present in every game: Hadouken, Shoryuken, and Tatsumaki Seppukaku, or Tatsu for short. His Hadoukens are a blue fireball made from ki that Ryu can fire from full screen. There are many different kinds of Hadoukens to go over, so I'll start with the basics and move on from there. His regular Hadouken is fired from 2 hands and is blue in color. Blue in Japan symbolizes stability, meaning that this technique is one that is reliable, and even with the upgraded versions in Street Fighter 5 and 6 don't change in color. When Ryu has Denjin charge, they become the Raiko Hadouken, which adds electric effects signature to the Muno Ken. The Shakunetsu Hadouken, or Red Hadouken, present in Alpha 2, 3, and 4, is a Hadouken that has added fire ki, hence why it's red. Though it's strange how Ryu loses it in 5, gains it back in 3, only to lose it in 6. I know that in release order it makes sense, but lore-wise it's weird. Ryu has a few super versions of the Hadouken, with the first one being introduced in Alpha being the Shinku Hadouken. which is a much stronger charged Hadouken that takes ki from the whole body, and once again is a pure blue in color. And it remains that way when Ryu has the Denjin charge, and the Shinku Hadouken becomes a Denjin Hadouken, which has the Satsui no Hado as a catalyst but not as the main power. This is a neat touch that Ryu only starts using this move after he's overcome the Satsui no Hado, so in 5, 3, and 6. Only present in 4 is the Metsu Hadouken, which is a bright purple in color. This is mainly because unlike the Denjin Hadouken, this does use the Satsui no Hado as the main energy source, but not enough to succumb to it, and hence why the fireball is purple in hue. This is also why Akuma's fireballs are purple in several games. Purple in Japan is considered a warrior color and represents strength, so taken to the extreme, you would have the Satsui no Hado overtaking you and emphasizing strength over anything else. Shoryuken is a strong uppercut punch, fitting into the Kyokushin fighting style of up-close strong strikes. Shin Shoryuken is a stronger version, specifically aiming for the jaw in later hits, and has 4 clean hits. In Alpha 3 specifically, it can be used from further away, as otherwise it becomes Metsu Shoryuken. Metsu Shoryuken starts with an initial hit to launch the opponent up, and is similar to the Shin Shoryuken, but this time, the Satsui no Hado is the main energy source of this, similar to the Metsu Hadouken. Tatsumaki fits the Shotokan style of being a forward-moving kick that knocks away. He also has an upgraded version being the Shinku Tatsumaki that only in Alpha appears as a super, but in later games is an EX move that has a vacuum effect and hits multiple times. A few of the other special moves Ryu gets are the Donkey Kick and the Hashogeki. We already went over the Donkey Kick earlier, as it's very close to a sidekick in actual Shotokan. In Street Fighter V, the Hashogeki is a V reversal, and is a ki attack that has the fireball not leave the hands, allowing for ki usage up close. This was later changed into a special move that Ryu could charge to also have the effects of a charged Hadouken. This also has a super in Street Fighter VI, being the Shin Hashogeki, which can also be charged. This further shows the versatility of Unsatsuken. Lastly, I would like to touch on a few of his character themes, being the original theme heard in many games, Kobu from 3, and Viator from 6. The main theme is an iconic touchstone of Ryu and fighting games as a whole, keeping a consistent beat and feel throughout the theme. It grounds Ryu, giving off more energy of a seasoned warrior that adds to his mastery, by even throwing changing tempos and very quickly returning to home base, which is shown even further in the Smash version. This is further doubled down in Kobu. Unlike most of the themes in Third Strike, which change up consistently with only the melody keeping somewhat the same, Ryu's base melody never changes, only gets added on as the theme goes on. Viator switches stuff up drastically. At this point, the world of Street Fighter is at a relative peace, and Ryu having defeated the Satsui no Hado, making it sound like a celebration while still keeping some of the instruments from the more Japanese roots such as the shamisen, perfectly fits Ryu now that he has found himself and has fully faced the demons from before, and can even start to enjoy fights from people like Akuma. Ryu is not only a phenomenal character in the context of a multi-game arc and how he learns to face his own killing intent and is able to let go of those fears, he is the essence of fighting games. He accurately reflects many people who love fighting games in a gameplay sense. Sure, the wants can be more complicated than that at higher levels, as we all would like to have enough money for food and the like, but at its core, we want to be better, become the best. We all want to strive for greatness, and the road to betterment at anything is a never-ending journey. He is the icon of fighting games.